take a look at this typical mortgage. You can afford up to £1,000 per month. For the past few years, you've been able to get a mortgage at a 2% interest rate, and over 25 years, you can borrow up to £235,000. Now, all of a sudden, interest rates are running at 6%. What does that mean? You can only borrow up to £155,000. So it doesn't matter how much demand there is, if the people lending you the money to buy a property won't lend you money, house prices are going to come down.
2 million people are on a tracker or a variable mortgage, and they are about to get shafted.
Indeed, house prices are forecast to fall between 8 to 10% this year. This is mostly due to the rising cost of living, together with the base rate of interest having risen from 0.1% in early 2021 to 5% in 2023. When looking to acquire a house, there are two types of payment. You can buy the house up front and own it, or you can make monthly payments to landlords for a temporary stay. In other words, you rent it. With the average house price being 8.3 times median earnings, most people must put down a deposit worth about 25% of the property value and take out a loan from the bank to purchase the house. This loan is what is known as a mortgage. Variable or tracker mortgages have interest rates which change directly in line with the base rate of interest. Fixed rate mortgages are mortgages with set interest rates for a predetermined period of time, but new fixed rate mortgage interest rate deals are also influenced by the base rate of interest set by the Bank of England. The main reason why house prices are projected to fall is because higher interest rates lead to a higher cost of new and existing borrowing and return on saving in UK banks, meaning it is more expensive to take out loans and mortgages to purchase property. Variable rate mortgage interest rates will rise directly in line with nominal interest rates. New 2-year and 5-year fixed rate mortgage deals will also rise in line with interest rates, so upon expiry you can expect renewed fixed rate deals to include more expensive monthly mortgage payments. This is shown by the fact interest rates on the average 2-year fixed rate deal have risen from 2% to 5.82% as the base rate of interest has increased from 1.75% to 5%. This means demand for housing and hence house prices will most likely decrease until inflation concerns are curbed and interest rates come back down to normal. However, rents will continue to rise irrespective of high interest rates as landlords pass on increases in buy-to-let mortgage payments due to the interest rate hikes to their tenants. Many reports are referencing the potential for a deep balance sheet recession due to negative equity, under the theory that if the housing bubble bursts, then people who have taken out loans, which are liabilities, to purchase houses, which are assets, will experience a fall in the value of the assets owned, with constant liabilities due to the loan. This means their liabilities could exceed their assets, so ceteris paribus, they would experience debt or negative equity. Many believe in the negative wealth effect, which states that if households experience a fall in the value of assets owned, they will feel less wealthy, so spend less and save more, and can release less of the added value of their assets using equity release schemes such as remortgaging, so stop spending money. At present day, I believe this theory is nonsense, as house prices are unlikely to fall as steeply as some reporters are projecting. There are two reasons why you should spare your sympathy for the majority of existing UK homeowners and be more concerned for aspiring UK homeowners due to the likelihood of house prices rising again in the long term. Firstly, house prices have almost doubled between 2005 and now, with a 20.4% increase in the 2 years following COVID, 10% drop in house prices following a 100% increase across the past 20 years, and a 20% increase across the 2 previous years is rather insignificant, especially for the wealthiest households in society. Secondly, the negative wealth effect from falling house prices is only applicable to certain groups within the last year, so it is largely overstated. If someone worth 10 million experiences a 2% reduction in wealth from falling house prices, are they going to stop spending their money? No. The arguments of falling house prices being detrimental to the economy applies most feasibly to low and middle class homeowners with a high marginal propensity to consume, who have only bought houses within the past year and did not benefit from previous years' increase in house prices. A very small proportion of the population who will no doubt benefit from rising house prices in the future when interest rates come back down to normal. You can make the argument that high interest rates will persist and so house prices will fall more significantly, but I personally think historic monetary policy alongside inflation forecasts would suggest that interest rates will come back down to normal and the demand for liability-driven investments in housing will recover, pushing house prices back up. Whilst in the short term house prices will fall due to rising interest rates, the long-term trend and supply constraints would suggest that house prices will continue to rise in the future. Yes, mortgages will become more affordable in the long term, but without intervention I believe house prices and rental fees are likely to continue to rise ahead of inflation in the long term. Keep watching to find out why. The UK housing market currently faces three major crises: a shortage of available housing, a shortage of affordable housing, and an abundance of poor quality housing. These crises disproportionately affect two groups: the young and the lower middle income households of society. Both house prices and rents have continued to rise ahead of inflation. The average UK house price has risen 83% from £152,000 in March 2005 to £278,000 in March 2022. The average UK house price was £286,000 in April 2023, which is £9,000 higher than 12 months ago, but £7,000 below the recent peak in September 2022. A survey by Resolution Foundation found that 15% of social renters and 10% of private renters fell behind on housing costs in March 2023. 19% of respondents in the bottom income quintile fell behind on at least one bill between March and December. Today, over half of first-time buyers rely on financial support from their parents. 10% of people in the UK live in poor quality housing, with 30% of private renters living with damp. Adults under 35 are 3 times more likely to live in poor quality housing than adults over 45, and the lowest income families are 5 times more likely to live in poor quality housing than the highest income families. There are a multitude of reasons for the UK's shortage of quality affordable homes, ranging from a history of ultra low interest rates and loose credit to market and government failures. House prices rise due to excess demand. If house buyers wish to buy more homes than house builders wish to supply, then house builders will usually raise their prices. There are two causes of excess demand for housing. One is increased demand for housing. If demand for houses rise, it's more likely house buyers may wish to buy more homes than house builders wish to sell, so house builders will raise their prices. I will refer to factors that have increased demand for housing as demand side causes. Two is supply shortages. If house builders do not have the incentives or planning permission to supply enough homes, then when home buyers demand more houses, house builders will raise prices rather than materially increasing housing supply. I will refer to factors constraining house builders' ability or incentives to supply housing as supply side causes. Whilst there is an excess demand for housing, the fundamental solution to the UK's housing shortage is likely to be to increase housing supply and improve regional allocation to meet the increase in demand. It therefore follows that the main issue with the UK housing market is its case-by-case planning system in an oligopolistic market. This is because there is little incentive for house builders to supply substantially more houses, which might push prices down. As such, it may be up to the government to create more affordable homes and combat rising yearly rental fees and mortgage rates through social housing investment. First, let's get on to the demand side causes of rising house prices. The UK has experienced a surge in demand for housing, resulting from ultra-low interest rates and loose credit. Over the past 20 years, the Bank of England's base rate of interest has steadily fallen from 6% in 2000 to 0.25% in 2021 to accelerate recovery from the global financial crisis. This meant the cost of new and existing borrowing and return on saving in UK banks also fell, making it cheaper to borrow money from banks and put down a mortgage. In other words, it's cheaper to secure a loan from the bank to purchase land or property. Alongside the loosening of credit, households' ability to borrow money to buy housing had increased, as shown by the loan to house price ratio reaching a record high of 8.8 times in June 2021. QE has created more demand for housing by depressing interest rates and encouraging the sale of low-yield bonds to switch to alternative assets such as housing. A bond is a loan to a business or the government government which can be sold. QE, or quantitative easing, occurs when the Bank of England creates money electronically to purchase assets, usually bonds from banks, insurance companies, pension funds and other financial institutions. When the Bank of England buys bonds, bond prices rise from excess demand because there's more demand for these bonds, and bond yields fall because yield is the amount you have to pay someone to hold your debt to compensate risk. High prices indicate less risk, so less money needs to be paid to bondholders to compensate risk. When bond yields fall, bondholders receive lower payments for holding debt, so sell their bonds and switch to alternative assets such as housing, creating more demand for housing. When the Bank of England buys these assets from banks, it gives cash to these entities. This increases the amount of cash held by banks, so banks have more cash to lend out and may pass on lower interest rates, leading to lower mortgage and debt servicing costs, which also creates more demand for housing. As housing demand has increased from interest rate cuts and quantitative easing during the pandemic, large house builders have raised their prices rather than materially increasing housing supply, potentially causing the house price to earnings ratio to reach 8.92 by the end of 2021. Loose credit and low interest rates have attracted more property speculation and second home ownership. Some of this has resulted in inefficient use of housing stock, particularly in rural and holiday hotspots such as the Cotswolds and Cornwall, where locals have been priced out of the market. Excess demand from second home ownership has led to a crowding out of first-time buyers by wealthier speculators. Some of these effects have been slightly reversed by the recent rise in interest rates, but it is likely that in the long term the rate at which prices are increasing will slow, and so interest rates and mortgage rates will fall, creating more demand for housing and pushing house prices back up. However, the surge in demand for housing is not only due to ultra-low interest rates, but also the UK's net migration, which has accounted for 56% of the UK's population growth between 1991 and 2018. As a result of this population growth, there's been an increase in demand for housing from D1 to D2, but with only a small increase in quantity supplied from Q1 to Q2 and a large increase in price from P1 to P2. This is because when there is excess demand for housing in a tight supply market, house builders have been able to sell at a higher price to maximise their profit margins, ultimately making houses less affordable. For this reason, the government's Help to Buy scheme and stamp duty holiday from July 2020 to the 1st of July 2021 may have further inflated the cost of housing. The Help to Buy scheme offered an equity loan for first-time buyers in England to buy a newly built home. In simple terms, buyers could put down a 5% deposit and receive a 5-year interest-free loan worth 5 to 20% of the property value based on its region. This was as high as 40% in London. This was originally supposed to cost the government £250 million, but was extended to 2023 at a £30 billion cost because government efforts to make houses more affordable to buyers created more demand for housing, which caused house builders to raise their prices. The stamp duty holiday, which enabled buyers to complete first-time purchases on property less than £500,000 without paying stamp duty, may have also contributed to the 8.5% average house price increase in December 2020. These measures failed to address supply-side issues and instead further stimulated demand in an oligopolistic market. Therefore, this shows how government attempts to get young people on the property ladder and stimulate economic growth during the pandemic could have further increased asset price inflation, making houses less affordable in the long run. When looking for supply-side issues, the UK's green belt and case-by-case planning system are often cited as responsible for the UK's price inelastic supply of housing. Figures estimate that the UK housing market has a price elasticity of 0.5, whereas the US, which uses a zonal planning system, has a price elasticity of supply of 1.6. The 1947 Town and County Planning Act established that planning permission was required for land development. This means that to develop land in the UK, property developers must send applications to planning authorities who need to approve developments case by case. Post-GFC cuts to local authority funding have further delayed approvals for new housing supply. Additionally, 1.6 million hectares of UK land consists of greenbelt, of which 35% is used for intensive arable farming, which is harmful to the environment anyway. Therefore, by having a case-by-case planning system and large areas of land surrounding cities in which housing developments are prohibited, it is inevitable that there is a shortage of affordable housing resulting from these ubiquitous planning restrictions. Another reason cited for the under-provision of housing is oligopoly market failure. An oligopoly is a market where 3 to 5 firms hold over 60% of market share. Price rigidity in an oligopolistic market means that collusion is necessary to maximise profits. This is because the major UK house builders are able to restrict the volume of new builds to maximise their selling prices and hence their profits. In the last decade, only 1.1 million homes have been built, with the top 10 home providers accounting for 60% of homes. Top 6 UK house builders control 1 million plots of land, 935,000 of which is held by the top 3. Alongside their economies of scale, this control of UK land means that smaller land builders struggle to compete, leaving the bigger players free to push up their prices when demand for housing increases. Alongside the constraints of planning regulations, it is therefore possible that the oligopolistic market is also in part responsible for the UK's exceptional house price growth in recent years. Another driver of the supply shortage of affordable homes has been the collapse of social housing. TLDR News stated that the government has gone from building 100,000 housing units each year to 0. It argues that Thatcher's right to buy policy, which gave council tenants 35% discounts on flat purchases and 50% discounts on social housing purchases to increase home ownership, coupled with social housing spending cuts and the removal of compulsory purchase orders, may have resulted in a reduction in social housing stock from 6.5 million in 1979 to just 2 million in 2015. It's estimated that 40% of the 1.9 million homes sold to tenants through right to buy are now privately rented. Therefore, the decline of social housing stock from Thatcher's right to buy, alongside cuts in spending on social housing stock, may have increased intergenerational inequality by making it more difficult for future generations to find affordable homes. However, it should be noted that demand and hence house price increases have not been evenly spread across the UK. For example, London's average house price is 14.2 times the annual salary, but Liverpool only has a house price to earnings ratio of 4.2. London and the South East in particular have suffered, with house prices beyond the reach of most first-time buyers due to there being greater demand for housing where a lot of the best paying jobs are. Therefore, regional disparities in house prices would suggest that the housing crisis is concentrated amongst certain areas, and thus government intervention to create affordable homes should be targeted regionally. At a disaggregated level, there is also a demarcation emerging between the split of demand across those looking to own first and second houses and for those for whom renting is the only affordable option. Some argue this is politically unpopular in the UK, where house ownership has been a reasonable aspiration for many decades. Successive governments have attempted to address this imbalance with high stamp duty payable on second home purchases and a high rate of capital gains tax on subsequent gains, but have failed to significantly reduce second home ownership. However, in Germany, rental stability and high quality social housing accompanied by similarly expensive home ownership has led to only 39% of the population owning the homes that they live in, compared with 60% in the UK. Some believe this suggests that the UK housing crisis is slightly overstated, in that it is possible to have a roof over one's head by renting without home ownership. However, Germany has a greater supply of social housing, a more equal distribution of wealth, with a Gini coefficient of 31% compared to 37% in the UK, and higher transfer taxes on real estate, all of which tilt incentives towards renting. It is not currently valid to say that in the UK renting should be a suitable alternative to home ownership. The argument that renting is a suitable alternative to home ownership is only ever made by people who own their own home. For people looking to settle down or have children, they need security. With the UK rental market subject to rogue landlords, renovation restrictions and rising yearly rent prices, it is no wonder that most of those who rent would rather suffer from negative equity than have no financial security. If the government eases planning restrictions to increase social housing supply, clamps down on second property ownership and implements wealth taxes of some form, then I could see the argument working better in practice. Until then, I have to support the view that the UK has a housing crisis and the government is not doing enough to rectify it. As housing is a basic need, demand is relatively inelastic, so solutions need to be sought on the supply side, including government policy intervention where appropriate. If renting were considered a politically acceptable alternative to home ownership, one policy which the government could implement would be to increase its supply of social housing. This policy is viewed through the lens that rent is a suitable alternative to home ownership if it is not owned by private landlords. According to the 2015 government white paper, the UK needed to build between 225,000 and 275,000 houses annually, but has only averaged 160,000 houses per annum since the 70s. In order to fix this problem, the UK government could increase spending on affordable social housing supply, which is not privately owned, to increase the UK's social renting population. Figures estimate that to solve the under-provision of housing, the country needs to build at least 340,000 homes each year until 2031. However, due to a combination of political concerns on its resonance with the electorate and NIMBYism, with NIMBYs being not in my backyard citizens who broadly support aspirations for home ownership but don't want it to be built near them, it is unlikely that this policy will be politically feasible, especially under the current Conservative government. NIMBYism is arguably thwarting attempts to increase social housing supply because it stops the government from constructing new housing developments in spacious rural and suburban areas. That said, if the government eases planning restrictions and takes matters out of the hands of local councils to increase social housing supply, this may provide a suitable alternative to home ownership that keeps a roof over some people's heads. Due to the constraints of planning permission and political opposition, an alternative policy to increase supply of social housing would be to use a street votes proposal. By giving residents the power to choose how their streets are developed, this could increase housing supply by as much as 111,000, as residents may be in favour of infrastructural investment in certain areas. Limitations of these policies are that residents may refuse to build more houses on their streets, even if there is an incentive, and the magnitude of the increase in housing supply is unlikely to significantly ease housing supply shortages and put downwards pressure on house prices. Alternatively, a policy which could be used to control asset price inflation might be to create a land value tax so that landowners pay a percentage of the value of land owned each year. This would make holding undeveloped land less attractive in a fair and efficient way. However, the issues with this tax is that it is difficult to calculate the value of land, and it is not intergenerationally equitable because at the point of introduction, current landowners could experience an immediate reduction in the value of land. That said, a progressive land value tax would likely put downward pressure on demand for housing from aspiring second property owners and provide an efficient way to redistribute wealth using the land registry without the same administrative burdens as a net wealth tax. In conclusion, the main issue with the UK housing market is that it has one of the most restrictive planning systems in the G7, which has resulted in an inadequate supply of new homes being built. This has been exacerbated by oligopoly power and increased demand for housing. To solve the UK housing crisis, the government has a responsibility to increase supply of social housing alongside easing planning restrictions, as in an austerity environment with rising interest rates, it is likely that private landlords will continue to pass on tax and interest rate hikes in the form of extortionate rent increases to their tenants.